Hey everyone, welcome to Comedy History 101. We hope everyone is safe and well. We have a special two-part episode for you today on the history of the Texas Outlaw Comedians, which fostered the comedy of Bill Hicks and Sam Kinison. Today, on part one, we're going to dive into the history of the Bill Hicks origin story and how he came about at this legendary Texas comedy club. And before we jump into the episode, take some time to like, subscribe, comment on Comedy History 101, wherever you get your podcasts, Stitcher, iTunes, Last.fm, etc. And we will actually read your comments on the air. And without further ado,
you're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
Good thing about doing comedy in Russia, you have captured audience.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
Comedy History 101.
Right now, we have coming to the stage not only one of Houston's best comics, but one of the best comics you'll see anywhere in the country. He's been on the David Letterman show. He's going to be on again real soon. Would you please welcome funny man, creative, original Bill Hicks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome to the first annual Houston Outlaw Comedy Special. I hope you're here to see the show, not just waiting for traffic to die down before you finish that trek to the suburbs. Houston comics have learned to love Houston. We learned to love it because we travel all over the country. We've been to places like Oklahoma. You learn to appreciate Houston after you've been to Oklahoma. You learn to appreciate things you normally take for granted.
So what you heard there was a young Bill Hicks performing in Houston, Texas in 1985. And yes, you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101. Where we school you in comedy. I, of course, am a quarantine Harmon Leon. With me, of course, is a quarantine Scott Colonico. How are you, Scott?
I'm wearing a mask, Harmon. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can, but
okay.
it sounds like you're just simply putting your hands over the microphone.
That's my newest mask. Yes, it works. It filters out all the COVID-19 particles.
Or it's a creative new filter you can find in GarageBand called COVID-19.
Or for those people working in the tech community out there, the in-joke is that it sounds like a Jira card number.
And we laughed and laughed and laughed. But Scott, would those working in the tech community laugh as much as, say, mid-'80s Houston comedy fans laughing at a group called the Texas Outlaw Comics?
I think they might. I think they might because, it was kind of like the Wild West back there in the mid-'80s in Houston where things were rolling and things were crazy. Actually, that's interesting that you played that 1985 clip because that was literally the height of the boom in Houston because, the very next year was when everything all just, kind of came to a screeching halt there because of oil prices and stuff.
So what you're saying in that era of the 80s was kind of similar to what 3 weeks ago in 2020 was like.
Exactly. Everything was all crazy and wild.
Come to a scratching halt.
You could actually go to the bar and order a drink. Look at me.
You could go down to Skinny Dennis and dance to a honky-tonk
you could
band
go to the
live in person.
I'm in the Brian Jonestown bar in Berlin. Play a song and play some Berlin things for me. Yeah. So, but it was pretty crazy. I mean, 'cause I think that's the thing that people don't really get because Houston was always kind of wild. I'm speaking as somebody who grew up in Houston, Houstonian who grew up in Houston at the time. It was just because oil was on a boom and everybody was making a lot of money. It was the Reagan years, and so people had a lot of money to throw around. And this was a time. This was the comedy boom.
Yeah, so Scott, when you hear the word or title Texas Outlaw Comics, what comes to mind then?
Well, the first thing that I'm going to think of would be Sam Kinison, but as I think we'll show out in this podcast, he's actually not the founder of the Texas Outlaws.
Yeah, so I guess to bring everyone up to speed, which we do because we are the host of this podcast and we are here to provide information on the history of comedy. The Texas Outlaw Comics were a group of comedians that were formed at the Comedy Workshop, a comedy club in Houston, roughly around the mid 80s. And it consists of the most famous people that were members of the Texas Outlaw Comics were Sam Kinison and Bill Hicks, who, Scott,
Yes.
I'll go on to say, are comedy legends.
Yeah, they're pretty big. Yeah, pretty good. But it also featured a lot of other guys who continued to perform comedy for a long time. Steve Epstein was actually the kind of founder, the guy who he actually trademarked the name Texas Comedy Outlaws, Texas Outlaw Comics. Excuse me. He actually trademarked that name. We'll get into that a little bit later. But there are other.
Yeah, I know where you're going with that.
There are other guys. I'm just going to name everybody who was in there. There was other comedians. There was Carl LeBove, Riley Barber, Dan Merriman, a guy named John Farnetti, and another gentleman by the name of Jimmy Pineapple. And these guys all had their own kind of different backgrounds and styles of comedy, but they were thrown together at this one time in the mid to late 80s at a place called the Comedy Workshop in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, most particularly though, I thought these were two different comedy clubs, but it was the Comedy Annex, which was a smaller room at the Comedy Workshop. Am I correct on
I'm
that
not
one?
really quite sure how that worked. Maybe it was like the big room and the small room in the comedy store. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I think they just had one room though.
Yeah, I thought it was two separate clubs, but then I did some Google and said the Comedy Annex was part of the Comedy Workshop.
Yeah, I think it was
I think it was like a room off from the main room, much like you have at, say, the Velveeta Room in Austin. They have Esther's Follies, and then they had the Velveeta Room. So, in the Comedy Store, you have the main room, and then you have, like, the Belly Room.
Yeah.
So,
no, I think it's like a lot of clubs like that. Like another one is like now called Cap City Comedy, but this is like where these guys used to play in Austin was called the Laugh Stop. There's one in Houston too, and there was like the main room, and then you had like a little smaller room.
Yeah, so essentially, this was like the original members of the Texas Outlaw Comics. There were 6 of them, original members, and they were kind of just a group of Houston comedians that formed kind of an incubator of like-minded comedy. And it's really strange. Like, I saw one of these very, very early clips of Bill Hicks, and in a way and in style, he's doing like a bitter breakup type story, and he kind of had like a Sam Kinison-esque in his delivery. And not to say, well, as Picasso said, stealing from one source is plagiarism, stealing from many is originality. Right. So, again, it was like an incubator of like-minded comedians that formed together, and in that incubator was both Bill Hicks and Sam Kinison.
Did y'all pay to get in here? Because I do not believe you should pay for anything in the world whatsoever. I believe the price of life is death, and we will all pay that in full. Everything else should be a gift. Everything should be a gift. I would like someone to explain to me how it is that my parents fucked one day and suddenly I'm getting phone bills. How does that work? My parents fuck, I pay rent. Excuse me?
Yeah, I mean, they were all kind of together at that one particular moment in history, which I think makes it really interesting. I mean, you had different guys. I mean, there was, I know for example, John Farnetti, who was one of the Outlaw Comics, was a lawyer. He was
also a lawyer, yep.
Yeah, he was a lawyer.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
And he was a lawyer, and he was married, and he had a kid. He had like a 2-year-old kid, so he was kind of weird. I mean, not weird, just different than your normal, 20-something, whatever comedian.
Are you saying that outlaws can't have kids? Are they Lone Rangers?
I just corrected myself.
Yeah.
And then you had the other guys like Ron Schock, who was one of the other outlaw comedians. He didn't start till he was 40.
And I believe he's still, Ron Schock, I believe, is still performing to this day. I saw him perform in, no, he's not.
He's performing.
Passed away.
He's performing elsewhere, Harmon.
But I did see Ron Schock perform in San Francisco, and he was like a storyteller comedian.
Yeah, he was like a storyist.
Also a crazy, interesting guy, because his background included being a jewel thief, a car thief, doing a stint in prison, but also being like on the board of directors of a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting background. Yeah.
So again, if you're a storyteller comedian and that's your background, you kind of got some stories to tell.
He told some stories. His big thing was he would kind of he would read a lot of stories out of the newspaper, but he would find these really ridiculous stories in the newspaper, like little one paragraph stories or something, and then just elaborate on them. And so that was
like a Mort Saul type thing?
Exactly, yeah, but like more of like a down-homey Mort Saul, because he was from the South somewhere. I can't remember exactly. I don't know if he was native Texan or not, but he had like a pretty nice Southern accent and just a drawl, and just the way he would tell the stories. Like you said, a storyteller. Just he would have his own pace. And like that was kind of one of his big acts. He would kind of pull up these newspaper clippings and kind of construct a story around them.
Yeah, so founder of the Texas Outlaw Comedians, Steve Epstein, said, just kind of given the ethos of the group, was we're looking for people who speak their minds, whose comedy comes from themselves, the people who aren't interested in selling out.
Right. Yeah. They wanted everybody to hang out with them as long as you had your own original voice.
Yeah, and again, if you follow, we'll do two separate podcasts on this, on, just generally the history of Bill Hicks and the history of Sam Kinison. But firmly, both Bill Hicks and Sam Kinison, found their true comedic voices by being members of the Texas Outlaw Comedians.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would not argue with that.
So, and let's give, and again, we'll do a completely separate podcast on that, but I'll give like a brief little history of, Bill Hicks and how he came to, being at the Comedy Workshop. So Hicks grew up in Houston in the 1970s. This is something I found out today. His dad was an executive at General Motors.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, his dad was kind of like a white-collar guy, and he grew up he says the suburbs, but he grew up in the suburbs in Houston in the 70s, where suburbs were, let's put it this way, they could ride their bikes to the comedy club, so it wasn't that far away.
Oh, really? But, okay, so they didn't ride their bikes to the comedy club because... Bill Hicks grew up with another comedian, Dwight Slade. They were kind of suburban buddies together, and they both, as teenagers, started doing stand-up comedy, I believe when they were like 14.
Yeah, they would ride their bikes to the club.
No. Their buddy would come pick them up. They would sneak out of their houses, and when the Comedy Workshop opened, they started like sneaking out on school nights so they could do open mic in downtown Houston.
I'll tell you my school career in a nutshell. 3rd grade, teacher leaves the room for 5 minutes. Some guy starts throwing around a pair of scissors, playing keep away, That's a lot of fun. They come to me, I throw them, they go in some guy's eyes and blind him for life. God, Hicks, what are you, a psycho?
Right, but sometimes they would ride their bikes there. I mean, they were that close, quote, close, unquote.
Yeah, then why did they have to have their buddy come pick them up?
Well, sometimes they would do that too. I mean, like if he, I don't know, I guess he wasn't around. I mean, it wasn't. I think we're talking about 5 to 10 miles.
Oh, okay.
Which on a bike is nothing. Yeah. It's not like I grew up when I would say the real suburbs of Houston, where that was like a good 20 miles away from the city, and that's not something you could ride your bike.
And just size-wise, is Houston bigger than Dallas, or vice versa?
Houston was like the 3rd or 4th largest city in the United States, and I think just land spread out. Houston's just really, really spread out. But the odd thing is, all the places that we'll be talking about in this podcast, In this episode, like where he grew up, the downtown where they lived, the Houston House Apartments, and the comedy club and the comedy workshop, they were all quote unquote. I'll keep using that quote unquote fairly close in Texas terms. They were all within like kind of the downtown area of Houston, so like really not nothing you could walk, but nothing that was. It was probably wasn't more than a.
It was like a Texas mile.
Houston, Texas
Everything's
mile.
bigger in Texas. It was a
Everything's
Texas
bigger
mile.
in Texas, man. But
You just put on your cowboy boots and mosey on over to the comedy club.
Mosey on down to the corral and watch out, partner.
And sign up to do your 5 minutes of open mic comedy. Yeehaw!
Yeah, I mean, if they had a car from where he grew up to the comedy clubs was like, if you had a car, it's like a under 20-minute drive, and with a bike, maybe an hour. So when you're
but most particularly that comedy club was the Comedy Workshop, and again that was suddenly opened up, at a time when there wasn't any other comedy clubs like Bill Hicks and Dwight Slade. They would do like kind of comedy. They call it like guerrilla comedy. Like at their high school, they would just like pop up and do like sketches for people.
Pop up comedy, dude. Their hipster food truck.
Yeah, this is before the hipster food truck. So they started like sneaking out of like their houses to do open mic when they're 16, and they were like a double act. So. But then Dwight Slade's family moved to Oregon, and that also like Dwight Slade's dad was an executive at Shell Oil, so it's like, they were kind of like in the upscale. You don't call it suburbs, but kind of area. Though they said it was suburbs.
Well, let's see. I think I might know somebody else whose dad was an executive at Shell Oil, but we weren't in the good suburbs. Dude.
You mean one has two thumbs and hosts a comedy podcast? But what was really funny is like when so his buddy Dwight Slade moved away, and that's when I think Hicks just sort of not really quit comedy, but he got more into like doing music than stand up.
Yeah. I mean, and Dwight moved away, and like he's still doing comedy. He's still kind of.
I've done shows with him in San Francisco.
Have you? How was?
It was all right. Nice guy.
Nice guy?
Yeah. You've seen the documentary American, the Bill Hicks story, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So he's a big figure, talking head in that documentary. Though style wise, it's a little dated. Because it's that style of taking still photos and making them 3D. That was kind of big in the early
can't do that anymore, dude.
2010s. Yeah. So, but good documentary. It was like good comedy stories.
Oh yeah, it was good. It was good, and it was interesting that it was done by two British guys.
Oh yeah. Because Bill Hicks was bigger in the UK than he was in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, anyways, when Hicks finally decided to go solo with his stand-up, he moved to LA, and him and Dwight Slade were roommates, and they started writing like screenplays together, and that's kind of where Hicks sort of got his comedy chops. He was like 22, and he already had like 7 years of comedy under his belt. Kind of again like stories we've told here on Comedy History 101 of like Eddie Murphy, just doing the comedy rooms around the boroughs when he was like 17, and same with like say Dave Chappelle, just these crazy teenage comics that when by the time they were 22 they already had like almost a decade under of comedy.
Yeah, well, we've got that clip, and we'll put it on the website comedyhistory101.com. It's Hicks getting interviewed by a Houston news crew. I think he's 23 in the clip, and he's already been on David Letterman a couple times.
I actually went on stage at a church talent show at church camp when I was 13 years old, and did Richard Pryor material. Yeah, I was demon possessed in their eyes. But I started off then, and then I was interested in comedy real early on, and this is like 1977, I guess, 76, and then the clubs started popping up all over the country, because I remember watching as a kid, watching comics on Carson, and that's when he started having them on like every week and then every night.
Why did they start popping up all over the country?
Well, I think it's because my own opinion is comedy is the last bastion of free speech. You get to see on stage at a comedy club someone calling a spade, not any network censorship. And this is when it's good. I'm not saying it's all like that by any stretch of the imagination. You get your share of hacks, of course. In any booming business, you're going to get the leeches and bootlickers, But for me, it is something you go to see where you can't see anywhere else. Not even when you see a comic on television can you see him really do his stuff. You don't ever see Richard Pryor on network TV doing his stand-up act. Now, if you come into a club, you can see a guy, no holds barred, doing anything, and a lot of people abuse that and they do old dirty jokes, or the people come to see dirty jokes. I don't really believe that, but when it's good, you get to see people, freedom of speech, different ideas, different opinions, and done humorously.
So when Hicks was living in L.A., cutting his chops at the Comedy Store, he was kind of like considered like the clean-cut comic. He was like the kid clean-cut comic. His material was about like his family and growing up in suburbia, So, but what really kind of was a game changer was Bill Hicks and Dwight Slade. They wrote a screenplay. And then they got the interest of a William Morris agent who said, I like it, but I think you should work on it. And they didn't sell the screenplay. So Bill Hicks just went and he moved back to Houston.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I mean, we'll get into this more into the when we do the actual Bill Hicks podcast.
No, you can get into it now, and then we can just like.
But what was because I'd never heard about that. What was because we'll post again. We'll insert clip here, or we'll put it on the website. That sitcom, that weird sitcom with Jeff Altman, about the Banana Republic.
No.
You put it in the document. What was that? Did you watch any of that?
No.
Burka.
Who was in that?
Dude, Bill Hicks, dude. You put it in the document. Like I'd never heard about.
Oh
it.
no, I didn't see. I must have something random, but I didn't. Yeah, no. Tell me about that. So Bill Hicks was on a sitcom with Jeff Altman.
Yeah. So this must have been. It's from 1982. Let me find. What was the name of it, dude? Yeah. What was? You didn't watch this?
No. I haven't. I've never even heard of it. Yeah.
Oh, Bulba. Did you see? So did you watch any of that?
I don't know. Was it as good as Curry and Chips?
No. No. Well, it was a sitcom. Let's see. I don't know. You can edit it around.
Yeah,
this,
sure.
But it was a sitcom about this fictitious like Banana Republic, in the Caribbean, and Bill Hicks played a Marine guard. It's from 1981, so it must have been like right when he moved out to L.A. And I mean, that's kind of doing okay. He got into this pilot that didn't get made into a series, but Jeff Altman was on there, and I don't think that I'd recognize anybody else on there. But it's called Bulba. It's on YouTube.
Oh wow, okay, yeah. So Scott, Bill Hicks, he was a bit delusioned about L.A. and the stand-up life out there. He moves back to Houston. What happens?
Comes back to Houston, starts going back to the comedy. Well, for a while, he wanted to live the straight and narrow path, so he decided to start going to school, to university. And he was living with a young woman at the time. They were dating, and then he wound up moving in with her and her parents, and kind of becoming buddies with her parents too. And he was trying to do the going to school, going to University of Houston, and doing that whole thing. And then just at one point, he said the story was that at one point the comedy workshop called him up and they were like, "Hey, somebody dropped out. Can you come and sub for them?" And he was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll be there." He's like, "College done." And he's like, "Yep, I never went back."
Holy shit! So he was like sort of like a drug addict, where the drug is comedy. Quit? Yeah. Did he completely quit comedy at that point?
Yeah, he just stopped. He stopped. He wanted to be like straight, normal dude.
Right.
He'd actually talked about being a preacher.
Oh wow! Which brings us, which is ironic and parallel to the next comic, the next outlaw we talk about, Sam Kinison. Oh, yeah, but anyways, so what was a big game changer was not only did he really find his voice, and what found his voice was a little thing called psychedelics.
Well, I mean, what are you talking about, Bill or
Bill?
Sam? Or both?
Bill, yeah. So, and again, it's like they both have kind of parallel lives where, Bill Hicks had his first drink when he came back and started performing again at the Comedy Workshop. The story was he never drank before, and I think he goes to one of the fellow Texas Comedy Outlaws, like, what's a drink that people normally drink? And he says, margarita. And then, so Bill went to the bar, he says, I'll have 7 margaritas. and he downs all of them, and then when he went on stage, he kind of metamorphosed, like all kind of his bitterness and angry and edge started coming out on stage, kind of there's also like a parallel to the Richard Pryor origin story, where Richard Pryor was also a clean-cut comedian, opened up in Las Vegas, and then just had an epiphany on stage that and quit comedy and moved to Oakland, and started hanging out with the Black Panthers, and that shaped it into the modern Richard Pryor that we know of. And this was also coming back to Houston and kind of started doing mushrooms, and we're not condoning heavy drinking, but it was like sort of the drinking and the mushrooms kind of unleashed kind of the bitterness and edge and angriness that was underneath his former clean-cut persona.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same, to bring that point up, is it's kind of the same thing with Sam Kinison, because even his brother said the same thing. It's like Sam he would just like go to the club and chug Pepsis, and then all of a sudden
at 25,
he was a preacher. Yeah, and then all of a sudden he was, he was doing comedy, and then all of a sudden he was like, all right, well, let me have some beers, and then, let me have some pot, let me have some of that cocaine, then they start getting into it.
So that's a good jumping off point, and we'll return next week with part 2 of the Texas Outlaw Comedians with the Sam Kinison origin story. Woo! And with that, it's time to plug away. Scott, what events are you doing from your home that you would like to plug?
From my home. Well, not from my home as much, but as people here have been listening to, I wrote and directed a movie. Harmon also co-wrote it with me, and it produced a short documentary called Betrayal, which was going to be premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival this month, but it also is going to be premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival this month. They're going to be doing a special online screening. So head over to the Tribeca Film Festival, it's tribecafilm.com site to find out more. I believe that's going to be in about 2 weeks. I think it's going to be on the 12th or 13th, on the 14th. Yeah, so you guys can check that out. I don't know if they're going to sell tickets or online tickets. I don't know quite how that's going to work. But please go over there and check it out. And then as always, I don't even know how that's going to work, dude. Who knows how anything's going to work.
I was laughing, Scott. Like, they should do the Tribeca Film Festival via Zoom. So, it's time for Betrayal.
we should make that movie, dude.
Wait, what's that pin to the screen? Just to clue you in, we had an incident lately with the live stream of our comedy show Jokey where some trolls pinned some pornography to our main screen, which we could not take down. So beware of the trolls.
And then also, as always, Harmon and I do another podcast called This is the President, where we delve into all things historical with current U.S. presidents, past and present, from Trump to FDR, all the way back to as far as you want to go. Well, not yet, but as long as they have audio clips, we'll play them. Also, we have a brand spanking new YouTube channel called This is the President. Head over there, go check it out. We'll do a podcast, we'll put up a video. You can check it out, watch some videos. It looks great. Thanks.
Yeah, here. And what I have to plug is also something that Scott is involved with. Next Wednesday, April 8th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Scott and I will be putting on a show that we have toured around the world called Jokey. Stand-up comedy, karaoke, and a 3-round game show. We'll be doing it via Zoom or we'll be doing it via Twitch. We are not going to give you the link because we had a trolley incident that happened last time. But you know what? Our learning curve has gone up immensely, so that won't happen again.
Oh, dear heavens.
No, it's a fun show. So Scott and I will be co-hosting it. together, and it's like we said, we get like 5 of the funniest comedians in not only New York. Now we got comedians from San Francisco and
All over
Los
the world.
Angeles.
And you can join. Our listeners can join.
Yeah,
you.
so I guess I'll put that link or more information.
No, don't
not
put-
the link.
no,
You don't get
no.
the link. We can't trust you. You might know a troll. So I'll put it on facebook.com/TaleNYC. You can get more information on that, but it'll be next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So with that, thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody so stupid.
Good thing about doing comedy in Russia, you have captured audience.
You're stupid. Everybody so stupid.
Comedy History 101.